Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Hope your Wednesday is going well. I'm Aaron Goldstein. I'm VP of Incident Response here at Todyl. And today I want to talk about something that I think is really interesting around initial access markets, the marketplaces that are responsible for buying and selling stolen data, credentials, which is the primary goal of today's talk, malicious, payloads, ransomware, and things of that nature. So today we're going to dive into a little bit beyond just what the standard ransomware talks are, and kind of talk about a little more about how these marketplaces work and how threat actors are trying to steal data in mass, harvesting credentials from as many users as possible, and the tools that they're able to accomplish these things with. So we'll dive right in. Um, First off, I like to kind of just give an overview of what these marketplaces are. For anyone that's not familiar, there are a lot of underground markets, mostly on the dark web, but some are actually on the clear net as well. And these marketplaces are for threat actors to go to buy and sell information that has been stolen from networks, credentials that the users have been phished and given up either usernames, passwords, but also things like MFA tokens and session data, cookies, things of that nature. And a lot of this type of activity is happening in a really advanced way over the past few years. It used to be that the threat actors that were coming in and breaking into the network and dropping ransomware and then leaving the note to get paid, they had to do all of these different aspects of an attack themselves. The one group, for example, SamSam, many years ago, a really notorious group that ended up getting shut down, but they had to be pen testers. They had to know how to do network enumeration. They had to be experts in a lot of different domains. And as these groups have become more and more sophisticated over the years, what we're seeing is kind of a shift in paradigm around these threat actors want to work smarter, not harder. And it's become more of like an organized crime style business where one of the things that's most difficult is finding and establishing a foothold in these networks to do whatever it is you want to do. So with these threat actors, now what they're doing is they're going and just buying their access to the networks that they want to target, or they're buying toolkits that make it really easy to do so. And so that's what I want to dive in today is how this is really advanced. From this slide, what I like to just kind of highlight is these markets are not brand new. They've been around for many, many years. A lot of sites that are, dark net markets and dark web markets. A lot of those sites are selling, various, packages of information, and some of these sites get shut down. New ones pop up, and we'll talk about that too. But to kind of talk a little more around how this ecosystem works from the threat actors perspective, who are the groups that are purchasing from these access markets, and who are the what we call initial access brokers, the groups that are harvesting the data. So from the initial access broker side, the groups that are focusing on getting the data, they want to phish you, they want to install malware, steal as much as they can from you to put it for sale on these markets and target their markets of where their customers are around ransomware groups, groups doing business email compromise, fraud, and even in some cases, corporate espionage. The corporate espionage is a little harder to quantify and show, but there is a number of public cases where a company was interested in obtaining intellectual property or plans or market approach from one of their competitors. And sometimes they'll even just use it for fraud and even manipulating markets and in purchasing stock or shorting stock, things like that, all by knowing about sensitive information like mergers and acquisitions or major issues that are happening. So all of these different groups are really benefiting from buying their access to a compromised user or network rather than having to go through all the trouble of phishing the users or establishing remote access and things like that. So there's a lot of different consumers spending money on this stolen data in those markets. As an access broker, the ecosystem and how this works is fairly straightforward. Their goal is to deploy out info stealers as a type of malware. We come across it fairly often. Info stealers, and I'll give some examples shortly as well, but an info stealer is a piece of malware that's installed on a system, and it can do a lot of different things based on how advanced it is. Everything from keystroke logging, doing man-in-the-middle attacks on banking websites and other authentication sites where that user is trying to log in, it will impersonate the browser and the website and steal that username, password, and MFA credential. They're going to harvest all of that data in bulk, and then they're going to sell that access and try and cash it out. So what they'll do is they'll put it on these access markets for sale, usually in bundles. If you've never seen one of these sites, think of it kind of like an eBay, where there'll be listings, and one of the brokers will say, I have 4 users for a Midwestern United States small business in the energy sector. I have their Office 365 and Microsoft accounts. I have VPN credentials, and I have, bank information. And they'll put that up for sale for Bitcoin or Monero or something along those lines, and then they sell that access. Now, with that, another cool talk I think down the road would be really interesting would be how these brokers and how these darknet markets cash their sellings or cash their profits out using money mules, buying illegal services, and a number of other ways. A little outside of the scope of today, but I find it really fascinating about how these groups are taking all of this crypto that they've obtained and how they're actually turning it into cash. There's some really interesting ransomware takedown videos out there where Interpol and some other groups are, busting down doors into what are essentially bunkers. And one, I believe it was Ragnar Locker. It might not have been. I know this is being recorded, so it may not have been Ragnar Locker, but one of the big groups, they busted it in. And it was basically a bunker, and there were all these old computers just sitting on tables, all dusty and really all just, kind of hodgepodge together. And really dark and dank room, and then all of a sudden you go into this bedroom and the mattress has been lifted off of the bed, and it's just stacks of cash, gold, and car keys for like Ferraris and Lamborghinis. It's absolutely wild. So there is an absolute market on how they're able to make their exit. It may not always be clean, and they might get caught as part of it, but it is part of the ecosystem as well. So these access brokers are making a lot of money, and what they're doing with it is also really interesting. Now, the markets themselves, there's a huge history going with these darknet markets and these access marketplaces. One of the ones that I think is really interesting is Genesis Market. It opened up back around 2015. And what I thought was really interesting about this one was there were other sites out there. There's raid forums, and there was a number of other ones that got shut down as well. But Genesis was one of the first to offer harvesting of cookies, session data, and what we call fingerprints. Not your actual biometric data, but actual, the data around your browser as a legitimate logon to a website. So it would grab all of this data, and when they sold it, it would offer kind of a virtual web browser that you could use. So if I purchased stolen credentials for, let's say, a bank account, and I use Genesis as a customer, I'm buying that credential from them. Once I'm in there, they offer this kind of virtual browser where it will use those cookies and data that it's harvested to actually recreate the session, and you can browse that bank account just as though you're that user logged in from their website. Some really cool stuff that they were doing there from a security perspective, but very scary, and honestly one of the starts to what we're seeing quite a bit with MFA, multi-factor authentication, credential theft, and session theft, which has really become a big problem. So this site, like I said, opened in 2015, and it was open for quite a long time, about 8 years. The FBI and Europol finally shut it down. The FBI, at least, always loves a good pun when it comes to their operations. So they named this one Operation Cookie Monster, partially due to the fact that the people using Genesis, they were stealing cookies and basically part of their gimmick there. So gotta love that. So Genesis was a big one and super popular in that regard. But yeah, a lot of you have probably heard of places like raid forums had popped up and super popular as well. It got shut down a little while ago, but there's always a new site that pops up in those cases. So one of the ones that's up today and really prolific is what's called XSS. XSS is a site. It opened back in 2013 or so under the name Damage Lab. And this is believed to be a Russian-sponsored site, probably part of the reason that it hasn't been shut down or hasn't faced any kind of repercussions. But this site rebranded several years ago. They were focused on selling malware, ransomware, frauding tools, stolen data, and phishing toolkits and things like that. A couple years ago, they decided to shut down. and rebrand as XSS. In part, what they did is they actually kicked most of their members out and then forced everyone through an application process to make sure that you were a legitimate threat actor. I know that sounds kind of odd. So you would have to demonstrate and upload proof of stolen data, proof that you do have a reputation in the industry. And then in many cases, you had to also have somebody who was already a member vouch for you as well. So this was an effort to kind of kick law enforcement and a lot of these analyst groups out there and threat intel groups out of these types of sites. So XSS is really popular, still around. Lots of carding information for stolen credit cards, phishing, and stuff like that as well. So really interesting site. Please don't go to it. It is on the clear net. But yeah, I would highly suggest against going to this site. Same with this one, Exploit IN. This is another site believed to be of Russian hosting. And this is another site where malware kits, ransomware, phishing toolkits, all of these are well available. Dumps of stolen credentials available for sale. Another really big access marketplace. What I thought was really interesting here, this site and XSS, probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, what they did is they actually went out and the admins of these groups put out a blanket ban on ransomware sales and toolkits. They basically stated that ransomware was generating too much heat. It was bringing too much notoriety to their forums, and a lot of the high-profile attacks were happening at the time. Think like Colonial Pipeline and stuff like that. So these ransomware groups the ransomware actors were getting a lot of negative press, and they wanted to bring some of the heat off of them. So much to the chagrin of a lot of their members, Exploit and XSS actually kicked out and banned the sale of ransomware toolkits and in those types of affiliate markets. Now let's talk a little bit about, the techniques that these groups are using. How are the access brokers stealing credentials so well? How are they so successful in doing this, able to offer, dozens of accounts, hundreds of accounts, sometimes millions of accounts that have been stolen? How does that work? We see a lot of organizations and we help protect a lot of organizations. And one of the things I always hear is, we have MFA, we have multi-factor authentication on our Office 365 and in Google. That is not enough, unfortunately, anymore. You really need to have kind of a robust, layered approach to security, and security posture is a very difficult thing to do in a single layer. And so, one of the things I wanted to kind of highlight is how, an attacker can use MFA to their advantage and really, abuse some of these tasks. So, for example, here, MFA on Office 365 and Google. There are a lot of different ways that a threat actor can generate a phishing attack that can also steal your session data, steal that MFA token, and allow a user to be compromised even with MFA. So as an example, there's tools out there like Evil Proxy. I'll show you some more details on that as well here shortly. That's a phishing campaign and phishing as a service tool. It will send out fairly realistic phishing emails to their users. That user is going to click a link that is impersonating your Microsoft, your Google, other websites, and it's going to prompt them for an authentication. Those users are going to log in with their username and password, and then their actual MFA token. And this tool and many of these types of toolkits, they're using a reverse proxy capability to actually harvest all that data. So before they pass that information on to the legitimate service, they're actually harvesting that information. That attacker can now use it, much like I was talking about with Genesis. That user now has a valid session and data that they can use to go and log in as that user without being prompted. One of the first things that we see a lot of these accounts that are being compromised that the threat actors are doing is establishing persistence. They're going to go and create a new MFA method. So the threat actor is logging into a compromised account and adding MFA, which is a really unique concept if you think about it. But the reality is here, the goal is for them to maintain their access. So if the user doesn't catch that or a service that is monitoring isn't looking for that, what's going to end up happening is the user changes their password, but now the attacker can still reset it with MFA capabilities. So pretty interesting mechanism there. Once they have the access, there's a lot of things that they'll do. Financial fraud is almost top of mind in business email compromise cases. You'll see a lot of things like inbox rules being created, moving emails from one location to another. So as the attacker, if I'm in that mailbox, I don't want the legitimate user who's also in that inbox to see certain types of emails. So they'll create an inbox rule that moves messages that have accounts payable, vendor invoice, new hire, things like that. Sometimes even words like hacked or compromise. And they're going to move that automatically to a folder, ideally that the user barely ever looks at. So most commonly, we see things like RSS feeds folder, which is present in almost every Office email account, but nobody's actually using that data. So nobody ever checks that folder. The attacker can now send out their emails, and when new emails come back, when they're trying to convince those users to, pay an invoice or, send a new hire their direct deposit, all those emails are being hidden from the legitimate user, and fraud is very common in that regard. So having good rules and identification of those is really important to be able to protect against this, because unfortunately, MFA is just not enough anymore. So before I go into how easy it is to send these types of attacks, and as an attacker, what my options are for actually phishing these users, I wanted to kind of talk about some of the ways that an attacker can provide, or can target systems and users. So from the attacker's point of view, if I'm targeting your organization, one of the first things I'm going to try and figure out is whether or not you have MFA enabled. If you do not, I have a lot of really easy ways that I can start trying to get into your systems and log into your accounts. First off, credential stuffing attacks. If you're not familiar with credential stuffing, it's the concept of looking at lots of other data dumps that have been stolen over time. Maybe you've heard of a site called Have I Been Pwned? Have I Been Pwned is a really common, a really great website. Troy Hunt runs that, a prolific security researcher. And the idea was that his group wanted to go and download all of the stolen data that they could, all the stolen credentials, and make a master list. That way, legitimate users could go and enter their email address and see if their email and password have been compromised in any attacks. So I think about, what was it, around 2014, for example, LinkedIn, I believe, had their compromise. That's an old database dump that is around and been floating around the internet for probably 10 years now or so. Your account, if you had a LinkedIn back then, likely if you type in your email address in that site, you're going to find out that that account was compromised. Now, most people aren't using the same password for every single service, but this can give you a heads up. And the idea of credential stuffing is really using any known old passwords and commonly used passwords against your target, trying to get lucky. Maybe your account was phished in a Netflix phish, and you use that same password for Office 365. This would make my attacker and the attack to be very successful. Incredibly trivial to perform these types of attacks, and really easy to kind of see a net result. There's also, standard phishing attacks. I don't have to do anything fancy here. I can try and phish that user and get them to enter their username and password. Not very difficult. We see this with users all the time, unfortunately. And then brute force, also trivial to conduct, just sending master lists of known passwords, common passwords, things like that. You just brute force it. You could even do, system generated or systematic password attacks. All of that is possible, but not going to work for most of your common targets. It's really going to be more for really weak passwords. Now, if my target does have MFA, my options are more difficult. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but my barrier to entry is harder, and that's what we want to focus on, right? That's what we want to do, is we want to make it harder for the threat actors, so that way they just focus their attack on somebody else. And so one of the things they can do is a session stealing phishing attack, like I've been talking about. I'll show you some options on how those are done very shortly, but I can basically send one of those phishing attacks that has that proxy built into it, or the reverse proxy, and it's going to harvest that credential and that token, giving them that access that I was mentioning. Moderately difficult to set up, but not impossible by any means. I can also perform MFA fatigue attacks. Another slide I'll show on and how effective these are. This is the concept of spamming your users, or a compromised user. You might have, as an attacker, might have a username and a password, but I can't get past the MFA prompt. That user isn't helping me out at all. So what you can do, and what's been very successful, is you continuously spam that user with a legitimate logon and password, which is going to make their phone and their MFA application start going, haywire. And then from there, you can either trick them into pressing the yes button and accepting it, or you can sometimes socially engineer them and trick them as well. I'll talk about some real life examples of that shortly as well. You could also go and look at how MFA and SSO is implemented at that level. This is a bit more advanced, and some of your more targeted attacks are going to look for these things. Perhaps there's service accounts or vendor accounts that don't have the same MFA requirement. Maybe the reset process with self-service is very simple. Maybe they can do it that way. Exploiting misconfigurations and in the implementation of MFA and SSO can be really another interesting target as an attacker. I might even try and just social engineer your support desk or help desk. Hey, this is user XYZ. I'm about to walk into a meeting with the CEO and I drop my phone. If I can't pull down this document from Office 365 in the next 15 minutes, I'm gonna look like an idiot and probably get fired. While coming from me, that was not incredibly believable. There are some people that are really, really good at this. If you've ever been to DEF CON or heard of DEF CON, the hacking conference, there's an entire village called the Social Engineering Village, and there's some incredibly talented people that are essentially con people that can trick people into doing almost anything. So attacks against your service desk is certainly difficult, but not impossible. And then for the highest value targets, what I might do is a SIM swap attack. Maybe I'm interested in stealing significant amounts of money, and your MFA is only sending you an SMS token. You don't have an application for it. You just get a text message. That is probably the most vulnerable version of MFA. And so what I might be able to do is call AT&T or T-Mobile or whoever your vendor is and convince them that I broke my phone. I have a new SIM card. I just need to port it over to my new phone, but I'm having trouble. Can you help me? Now, all of a sudden, if they were successful in tricking the phone carrier, what's going to happen is every time your target gets a text message or a phone call, you're also going to get it on your attacker phone. So you go and log in, you get the SMS with the code. Now it's showing up in my hand. I can type in that code and perform my attack. That is difficult to do, but has been attributed for many multi-million-dollar thefts. Really, really interesting stuff there. So at a high level, hopefully that helps you kind of understand, how some of these attacks work. To kind of dive into some more detail around it, some of the things that I can do as an attacker, I don't have to be an expert. What I was mentioning is we don't have to know how to do everything from start to finish. I don't have to be a pen tester, network enumeration, privilege escalation master, and then, drop my ransomware. I can use tools that make this a lot easier. So for one, this is called Evil Jinx. This is a tool that's available. You can go and download it. Please don't, but you can. And this will generate very, very convincing phishing sites. This site here, like on the right-hand side, or rather on the left-hand side here, this is the tool being run. It's generated a fake landing site. And then when the user enters their username and password, it will then prompt them for that MFA token and steal that as well. So this is one way as an attacker I can actually set this up and get this going. I can steal those MFA tokens and completely bypass that. This does require, some configuration. I have to probably know how to run Python. I probably have to buy some interesting domains. There is a level of effort required to get this going, and it's not for everybody. And there's a lot of tools out there now to make this as easy as possible. But what's really interesting about these business email compromises and these types of attacks, a couple years ago, it was almost always a foreign logon. What we would see is what we call a risky sign-in, where that user normally logs in Colorado, and now all of a sudden they're logging in from a foreign country. It was very obvious in most cases to see what business email compromise happened and alert on it. But these threat actors are getting more advanced in their approach here. So these types of tools, when the attacker does compromise your account, what we're seeing a lot more of as a trend is these attackers are using a proxy or a VPN to appear to log in a lot closer geographically than foreign countries. So that user, typically in Colorado, now we might see a login from a VPN in Colorado or from a VPN in Utah. So they're trying to avoid some of those risky sign-on alerts. They're trying to avoid detection with these types of tools. Another thing, I mentioned that it requires a level of effort to get that going. Maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I don't have the time or expertise to build out domains and create phishing attacks and learn Python to run these scripts. Maybe I don't want to do all that. On one of the markets, or actually on multiple markets, there are services, phishing as a service, that as a threat actor, I can just buy and they will do everything for me. Really makes it a lot easier as an attacker. I don't have to specialize. For example, this is Evil Proxy. This is one of the most prolific ones coming out a couple years ago. They are essentially offering phishing as a service here. As an example, Microsoft for $400 a month. I can have access to a toolkit that will automatically phish my targets. It will create the domains. It will give me a site that I can manage all the compromised accounts. It will let me run everything as I need to as a business for $400 a month. Now, one of the things I find absolutely amazing about this is they also want to build a reputation when they started out. So what they're doing is offering a free 1-day demo. So try them out, see if you like it, right? Pretty interesting that the business models that are effective for legitimate companies are also being adopted by these threat groups. So this makes it as easy as possible. Anyone could come up with $400, try and phish people. One business email compromise is probably going to get you that money back 10 times over. So this is just another way that the barrier to entry as a threat actor has become lower, and it's introducing a lot more attacks because it's not just the sophisticated people out there running these anymore. We were talking about MFA fatigue attacks. I don't like to call any companies out. My personal thought is that almost any organization can get caught in a bad situation and can end up in the news. So I kind of censor this. And the way I like to think about this is, what if this was your company name listed here? There are groups out there using MFA fatigue attacks, very high profile ones, Fortune 100s that got hit by this in the news. As an example, one organization, a contractor that had access to a network of interest, they kept getting spammed with MFA verification. They thought there was a problem. All of a sudden, they got a phone call from that company's tech support saying, "Hey, we've run into some issues with MFA. Are you running into that? If you are, could you just hit yes on the next one and we'll fix the issue on the back end?" That was actually the attacker that got them into the network. Then it was game over. These types of things are becoming more and more prevalent. MFA bombing, MFA fatigue attacks, that's kind of what they're called. And there's a number of things that have been released to try and reduce the effectiveness of these attacks. So one, you might have noticed what we call number matching. So your Microsofts, your Okta, your Duo, all of these now have what's called number matching as an option. And so when you log in, you're going to type your username, your password, and then it's going to prompt you in your MFA app, but you're also going to have to enter a number that's on the screen. And that's one of the ways that they're trying to stop this, is make more awareness around who's being prompted and who's actually entering in the proper information. So there's a lot of things on the works for this, but it is unfortunately a pretty effective manner for threat actors to gain access, even with MFA protections in place. We talked a little bit about info stealers as well. Info stealers steal all that information. They're gathering, your clipboard information, data, scraping passwords from memory, getting into your browsers and dumping that information. All of that's possible with that. But they also get embedded into tools all the time. So you might ask, well, who's dumb enough to install an info stealer? Well, there's a lot of ways these can happen to somebody that's not paying attention or is not savvy enough to understand what's happening. One of the ways that happens a lot is with what we call, pirated and illegitimate software. So my favorite was this Grand Theft Auto 6 install wizard. Started coming out right after the Grand Theft Auto 6 preview or trailer came out. And it was packed with all kinds of fun malware. They kind of like a phishing attack. They want to prey on your sense of urgency or, something that's juicy and interesting. So somebody set this up, and I don't know the exact malware behind it, but it's definitely not a legitimate version of Grand Theft Auto 6. So maybe save yourself from downloading that one. Things like on the right-hand side, Microsoft Toolkit, Windows Toolkit. These tools have been around for a long time. It basically cracks the activation for Microsoft products, your Windows, your Office applications. They do work. It's not a good idea though, because these tools do a lot of sketchy things on the back end. We get alerts for this type of stuff all the time. So while you just hit an easy button to activate your system, what's really happening on the back end, it's setting up scheduled tasks. It's doing setting up persistence and some other nasty stuff. So you cannot trust these types of tools to give you what you want. want. You might get that free operating system, but chances are it's spying on you and doing some bad stuff. And then same thing I was looking at, most commonly pirated applications, tools like Adobe Photoshop and, Final Cut Pro, really common to see these types of torrents and torrent sites packing malware into those applications with the express purpose of stealing your information. So another way that this gets out there really well. And then never underestimate the power of social engineering, fraud. We might laugh at these, if you're a security practitioner, IT practitioner, we might kind of laugh at these, but users are going to do user things. It's just how it works. There's unfortunately a sense of urgency. People panic. They get a pop-up saying, "Oh, your computer's infected. Call this number," or they get a phone call saying, "Hey, this is Microsoft tech support. We noticed there's an issue." All these types of things, it happens. And so this type of fraud, really easy way. Those tech support scams, a lot of times they're installing remote access tools, and then they're going to drop either malware or password stealing tools as well. Pretty nasty. And then one other thing I really like to mention is around, there is no honor among thieves. There's a lot of these leak sites out there. There's a lot of these markets where stuff is for sale, but there's also a lot of rivalry. There's a lot of reputation and clout associated as an attacker in these sites. So what you'll also see is one site attacking another site. So, for example, Raid Forums was one of the markets around. Before Raid Forums got shut down, somebody hacked it and dumped every username and password and private message and everything else from their site and completely stole it all and offered it for sale and for download on other forums like breach forums. These types of things happen all the time. So even the dark net markets are not above, being attacked and being compromised and that data being sold. So it's really common to see that type of thing too. For example, the one here, Exposed VC was another forum several years ago, and somebody found a My Bulletin Board 0-day in it and was able to dump all of it and posted it on a different forum. That's just kind of how they work. They want a rivalry. Sometimes they just do it for fun. Some people just want to watch the world burn. So those are all different ways that the threat groups can be also attacking each other. And then another one, same thing. These dumps. It's I'm talking about kind of small market, maybe 100 or 200 accounts, but these are also sold and bought in bulk. There are wholesale markets as well. And part of when I was talking about Have I Been Pwned, that website, one of the things I thought was really interesting was in mid-January, Troy Hunt and his group purchased a password dump. I believe it was around 70 million credentials that they bought. And that's kind of common. People will repackage those dumps. They'll take the old ones from, LinkedIn and Last.fm, and, they'll repackage it and make their dumps look more interesting by adding volume to it, even if it's old and recycled data. But what he thought was, or what they found with this dump was that 25 million of the 70 were brand new credentials, meaning that they were not seen in any other data dump. So if that helps you kind of understand that while we know about a lot of the ways that this is happening in mass, there is likely even more way beyond what we're doing and what we're able to see. So keeping an eye on that and always having an ear close to the ground for what your users are doing, making sure you have security controls in place to help protect and respond to this is super important, because these types of activities aren't going anywhere. One last thing I like to demonstrate, please don't go here. Maybe I shouldn't say that so easily, but just as an example, Sapphire Stealer, I don't want to go too far in the weeds with like a malware reversing demo or anything like that, but Sapphire Stealer is an open source info stealer that you can go and download literally from GitHub. And it is as simple as it gets. You run this tool, it's going to capture keystrokes. It's going to impersonate websites and steal your credentials. It can send the messages over Discord. It also logs everything to a passwords.txt file. It's really wild what this can do, and it takes no skill whatsoever to set this up. What I wanted to show here is like, this is what, 15 lines of code maybe, and in this 15 lines of code is all you need to dump all the passwords from the Chromium browser. It's as simple as that. And these tools are out there, and it's not going to become harder. It's going to become easier for the attackers to do this. So if anyone can just go to a website, download this tool, and install it on a system, it shows that as security practitioners, we have to keep our guard up and we have to make sure that we can defend because, like I said, this is going to become a more prevalent type of attack, and it's not gonna go anywhere. So I've presented a lot of problems. I've shown how, a lot of really common security controls are no match for our common attackers or our more advanced attackers. How can we solve that? What are the ways that we can do to actually improve and make sure that we don't fall victim to these types of attacks? Now, many of you might have been familiar with what's called the pyramid of pain. This is kind of my version of it for protection. I'll come up with some kind of funny name for that later. But the idea is, as we start at the base, you need to have a solid foundation. And as you build that foundation, you can start doing more and more advanced things. So walking through this without logging in visibility into what's happening on your network, you're not going to be able to do anything else. If you don't know when your users are logging in from foreign countries, or when inbox rules are being created, or malware detections are firing, if you don't have some way to log that and retain that data and alert on it, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you should consider implementation or working with a vendor like Todyl to get that in place. The goal is we want to bring everything into one platform. We want to bring all the data in one spot so we can alert and bring visibility and response around it if there is something suspicious happening. From the Todyl end, we log all the data from the endpoints, from our integrations like Office 365 and firewalls and Azure and everything else. We bring all that in, we alert on all those sources, and we can respond to them as well. So logging and visibility and retaining that data, absolutely paramount before you can focus on the rest. MFA and conditional access. You've heard me say MFA is super important. I think everybody understands it's important to drive that home. But using conditional access can be an excellent way to add on to MFA. You should be using MFA beyond just your Office 365 and email. It should be on all your remote access, all your SaaS apps, and all your tooling wherever possible. But adding conditional access can make this a lot easier as well. You can restrict and create conditional access policies to only allow logons from certain criteria. For example, if your business and all of your employees is strictly in the United States, you could create a conditional access policy to say, I do not want to allow anyone to log in from outside the United States. Very simple to set up and can really help limit the attack surface that the threat actors have to touch. A great way to do that as well with Todyl's SASE product is using our SGN IP addresses. So every system that's routed through our SASE product has a SGN IP address. You can use those in conditional access as well to make sure that when your users are accessing something sensitive, they not only have the Todyl SGN agent on their system, but it's also in MFA mode, and they have verified their two-factor authentication through that. So really great ways to restrict that access using MFA and conditional access. EDR, I won't spend too much time on this. I know everybody's aware of how important EDR is. Traditional antivirus is not enough. Looking at just malicious files and binaries that can do malicious things is not enough anymore. We have to be able to identify malicious behaviors, utilities that are being abused. We want to be creating alerts for things like PowerShell reaching out to the internet and downloading files to app data local, or encoding in base64 a malicious payload. We need to be looking at the tools that are happening, and not just look at malicious files, because as I've proven with these initial access markets, a threat actor might be able to buy their way into a network without ever dropping malware. And so they can use the tools that are already on the systems and abuse them for their own purposes and never trigger an alert. So your EDR should be looking at those malicious behaviors as well. Privileged account management, restricting access to only those that need it. Easier said than done. I completely understand that. Really easy to stand in front of somebody and say, hey, you should be doing this, and knowing that organizations are all different, and that is not always an immediately possible thing. But what I would say is start looking at where those admin tasks are coming from. Are there ways to restrict it? Can you put some controls around it, or at least audit that type of activity? So if you can use an identity access management tool or PAM, always a great way. But I understand that that's not going to always be possible. And then the icing on the cake there is going to be password auditing. Like I've said, users are going to user. they're going to do things that they probably shouldn't. And so making sure that you have tools that can audit like Azure Active Directory, looking for weak passwords, looking for password reuse, things like that, and giving you an idea of where your password policies and users' passwords are sitting can really be helpful as well. So with all of these different things, we can help protect and make those threat actors move on to the next low-hanging fruit rather than our organizations. So this is a long-term goal. You're not going to be able to just do this overnight, but with tools like Todyl, we can make this a lot easier for you and make the barrier to entry a lot harder for those threat actors. Awesome. So that's about all I've got as far as presentation goes. It looks like we had some questions here. I want to make sure I get to those. Let's see here. Yes. So a question here around Evil Jinx and how it's how it can be branded. Yes. So just to go back here, just go back a couple slides so you can see it. So Evil Jinx, this is a tool that attackers can use as a phishing toolkit. Yes, you can customize this. It doesn't have to be a Microsoft logon. This can be a number of different types of things. So you could set this to Google or GitHub or whatever you want and customize this with your own branding to make it look a lot more legitimate. Absolutely. So it can be very targeted. Really nasty tool in that regard. Incredibly effective, though. I've used it to do some test phishing, and it does work. Next question, can you confirm that Total SASE can prevent session stealing? Excellent question. So when it comes to session stealing, there's a couple, it's a bit of a detailed answer here. So for example, SASE will block known malicious phishing sites. So sites that have a malicious disposition and that user clicks on it and tries to log in, yes, SASE will block that type of traffic. The idea is to protect our users' network traffic using our SASE product, routing it through secure DNS, intrusion prevention, malicious scanners, and things like that. It will prevent that. There are situations where, let's say, a brand new domain is stood up for this type of attack, and that domain's not on a threat intel list. So in those situations, we do have detections. While it may not prevent that attack from happening, we have a significant number of detections that can identify this type of behavior. So one is around the Azure integration. So if you haven't set that up, I highly suggest adding the Azure and Office 365 integrations to your stack. You can easily configure those within the Total portal. That will give us all the authentication data we need to identify session reuse, rare logon location, rare logon behavior, and all of those types of things. So there are a lot of ways that we can prevent those types of session stealing activities and alert when we do see the suspicious behavior. So that user logging in from two different locations with that same session, great example of a way that we can help detect that. Perfect. I think that's about all the questions I have in my list here. I really appreciate everyone's time today. If you have any questions about this content or anything else, if you're an MXDR customer, feel free to shoot us a message in your Slack and Teams channel, or you can shoot us a message at mxdr@total.com, and we're happy to answer the technical questions, or feel free to reach out to your account manager for more details as well. Thank you for your time today.